Okay, so I don't know if you're already there, but we are in the Sermon on the Mount. And so I wrote the passage up there, Matthew chapter 5, Matthew 5, verses 27 through 30. And so for those of you who are watching the video, unfortunately, I forgot my microphone today. So that means the only person you're going to be able to hear is me. And we were just talking about tedious, and that is tedious to only listen to one person through the whole time. But that's what we got because I forgot the microphone. So, okay. So what we're going to talk about is so let's go ahead and read the passage. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read it once again because the poor video viewers can't hear anything else. But if you video viewers are there and you're paying attention, then we're Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, starting at verse 27. Okay, so it says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." So we got some extreme stuff from Jesus today. So I've got some things that I wanted to ask, and you guys can't answer, but that's okay. I want you to try and answer anyway, even though they can't hear you. But if you answer, talk a little bit loud, and we'll see if we can't do this. So Jesus is talking about lust in this passage. So why is lust bad? What's bad about lust? I mean, Jesus talks about lust as being bad, right?
Right.
Okay. Or lust as being part of committing adultery. But, let me ask you this. Is lust always bad? For instance, is it okay for a married couple to have lust for each other?
I would think so.
I think that's probably okay. What about a couple who, before they get married, they have lust for each other?
Which is probably the reason why they get married.
That's right. So if they're gonna, how are they gonna, so it's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And most of the time, for most people, it starts with lust. And those people who say, well, no, lust is always wrong, I say that you must really go for arranged marriages because there's like no other way.
Yeah.
There's either arranged marriage where people didn't know each other when they got married, or you get married because they like each other. They're attracted to each other. And I mean, that doesn't mean that just you don't get married just because you want to go into bed with somebody, but that's that aspect of it, right? That's part of the whole deal. Okay. So lust can be bad and lust cannot be bad. Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. It's kind of like when we were talking about anger a couple weeks ago. Anger, we said, is the idea of somebody getting angry or feeling anger because they see an injustice. That's okay. We should feel angry. Jesus felt anger, right? And so that's okay. It's when anger turns into violence or turns into verbal abuse. That's when it gets to be a problem, right? Well, it's kind of the same thing with what Jesus is talking about with lust. Lust is not a bad thing by itself. It's okay for people to get married. It's okay for married people to have lust for each other. It's okay before you're married to have lust for each other, And so really, and so one of the things that we need to look at is Jesus is talking about the context of you shall not commit adultery. So adultery is specifically where you have someone who is married or in a committed relationship, and they are having sex with someone outside of that relationship, right? And so that's the context in which Jesus is talking about. So he's not really talking about just lust in general. He's talking about adultery. So you got married people, and they are in the process of some way of having lust with somebody else. Let me ask another thing, because this is another aspect of lust. People who have dreams about sex. People who have dreams about sex. Is that right or is that wrong? Is that a bad thing? Is that a sin to have a dream about sex? About somebody who you're not married to, I mean.
I don't know, because you can't really control your dreams.
You can't control it's not a choice
Right.
that you're making. It just happens, right?
Right.
So so is it really a sin?
No.
Yeah, it's not a
don't think
sin.
so.
It's not something you can control.
Yeah.
It's lust, right? It's a kind of lust. And you could even say that possibly it's adultery. If you're married or in a committed relationship and you have a dream about somebody else, having sex with somebody else, well, then you could say on the one hand, well, that's adultery. On the other hand, you say, but I didn't control it. I didn't want to have that dream. It just happened, And so is it a sin? Probably not. No, it's not. It's not a sin, Okay. So now let me ask you one other thing. Okay. Is it a sin to think about doing a sin? Is it a sin to think about doing a sin?
I think so.
You think so?
I don't know. Yeah, probably because you're thinking about it.
Okay. So, like for instance, if someone is on purpose thinking about having sex with somebody else that they know,
Yeah.
that would not be a good thing. But let's say they're just thinking it, but they're not doing anything about it. They didn't say anything about it. All that's happening is it's going on in their head. It's not going anywhere else. They may have thought of it, but they didn't do anything. It's just in their head. If somebody, let me ask you a different scenario. Let's say that there's somebody who they're standing in line for a bank in the bank, and they're thinking about robbing the bank, and they're thinking about how they could rob the bank, but they don't do anything about it. They just go get their money from the bank and leave. But they're thinking about robbing the bank. Is it a sin to think about robbing the bank?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. That is a
I'm not
good
sure.
question.
And when we know robbing a bank is a sin,
Right.
yeah, that's bad.
But thinking
Okay.
about it, I don't know.
But just thinking about robbing the bank, even maybe thinking, gosh, it'd be nice to have all that money, and I'm thinking about robbing the bank.
It kind of goes with having lust
Mm-hmm.
without, you're still thinking about it. And
Yeah.
Still,
Yeah. But it's tricky.
yeah, it is.
Because I mean, if you think about it that way, we have thoughts along those lines a lot.
Yeah, we'd be spending all the time.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, which of course some people say. Some people say we are sitting all the time because it's going on in our heads all the time, right? And so we may think about. In fact, this is something that we do think about a lot. Man, I'm going to tell this person this and this and this and this, but we keep it in our heads. We don't actually say that to them. Say these horrible, nasty things, but we think about it. It's in our heads. Well, are we sinning because we're thinking about it? Are we sinning because we want to do it? Or is it a sin? But or is it a sin only if we actually do it? Because I'll tell you, if just thinking about it is a problem, then we're all in trouble.
Yeah.
Which some people say. There's a group of people who read the Bible who say, yeah, all those thoughts count, and that's how come we are all sinners all the time. That's what they'll say, is that we are sinners like that all the time because those are the kinds of thoughts that we struggle with. And they will say having those kinds of thoughts, wanting to do those kinds of things, actually constitutes a sin before God. It makes you impure before God. But that seems kind of weird too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because we didn't actually do it, and and the thing is that we process things. Okay, I'm going to give you another example. Worrying. Okay, I know, yeah, I know. We worry all the time. Jesus tells us not to worry, right? We're not supposed to worry. Be anxious for nothing. That's what Paul says. Paul says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. And Jesus says, do not fear. Okay, but we are afraid, and we have things that we worry about, and we sometimes spend a lot of time thinking about what we're worrying about. And so, is it a sin for us to worry? These are hard questions, and I'm not necessarily going to answer all of them, but I'm going to give us a thing to think about. I'm going to give us something to think about by the time that we're done here. Okay, so these are questions. So let's deal with this passage. Okay, so Jesus is saying, "You have heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery.'" Okay, we all know cheating on your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or girlfriend is bad. Everyone knows you don't do that. Okay? But how many people have you heard say, "Oh, well, what I did there wasn't really cheating. I didn't really cheat. I only did this." Okay? That's and there's a lot of people that say that, mostly guys, but not only guys. Now there's a lot of people who are always faithful, and it's fine and it doesn't matter. But there's a lot of people out there who are saying, well, it's not really cheating because I only did this. Oh, I was only flirting, right? Oh, I'm only flirting, so I'm not actually cheating. Oh, well, we only went to second base, but we didn't actually go to fourth base. She's dying. I take it you know somebody like this. We only went to second base, but not fourth base. Okay, so it wasn't really cheating. Okay, and so Jesus is saying we all know that it's wrong to cheat on your significant other. But what about if it doesn't go that far? What about if it's not actually intercourse, but it's something less than that? So, for instance, he might bring up the question. Somebody might say, "Oh, well, all I did is I touched her butt, but I didn't do anything else," or I just touched her boobs, but it's not really cheating. Okay, and you go, well, wow, that's wrong. Well, what if the guy's a gynecologist?
Right.
And he's actually doing it. I mean, what if he tests people? He tests women. And so you got to touch, you put on your gloves and you do all that. You're acting appropriately, but you can't call that cheating. So you don't want to say, well, touching this area is always cheating. Well, because if you're a doctor, then you can do it in a clinical way. So that makes sense. Well, what about flirting? Is flirting cheating? If you're already with somebody, then yeah.
But if you're not,
Yeah. Well, I think, well, if you're not, for right now, let's see, because adultery doesn't cover people not in relationships. Okay, there's another word that might cover those kinds of things, and that's a word in the Bible called fornication. Okay, and so there are actually two different Greek words, they mean different things. So adultery is a more narrow term, specifically talking about a married couple. Fornication talks about any number of kinds of sexual deviance or not deviance, but sexual sins. So any other sexual sin, including adultery, but all the other ones too, are included in fornication. So if you want to see a list of them, you could look at Leviticus 18, because that has a long list of them, including sex with animals, including incest, so all of that goes under fornication. But here we're mostly talking about just cheating spouses, okay, or significant. If you have a committed relationship of any kind, cheating outside of that. Okay, so there's all that. So what Jesus says is he brings it down to a very specific example. And he says, I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, let me tell you what he's not saying. He is not saying that a person who just you get some guy and there's some woman passing by on the street and he looks up and he stops talking for a minute and then he looks away and starts talking again. He's not talking about that situation. He's not. Okay. He is not talking about a situation where somebody is just looking at someone of the opposite sex and they're saying, "Oh, that person looks really handsome," or "That person looks really nice," or that person, or even to say that person is married to that spouse and that spouse is really lucky. No problem. That is not what Jesus is talking about. Not talking about those things. He's using a very technical term, which everyone in the first century would understand, but nowadays we don't understand so much. To look with lust, so the word lust actually doesn't mean in the Bible the same way that we mean it today. It means covetousness. Okay, covetousness, the word that's used is actually to covet, which means to desire to possess. So like the 10th commandment, you've got the last commandment says, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife or his manservant or maidservant or his ox or anything that belongs to your neighbor. In other words, that is talking about specifically looking and wanting to possess that for yourself. That's what the term that Jesus is using. But to look at something and to lust or to covet it is in the Bible, that is called the evil eye. We've heard about the evil eye, and the evil eye is like supposed to be some curse, right? Somebody has some weird evil eye and they look. But it's actually in the first century, it means to leer or to stare at something because you want it really bad. And we know about that look because if you're going shopping and you're in the mall and you can't stop looking at that thing in the window and you're just looking at it and you go away and then you come back and you look at it again, that's the look. That's what Jesus is talking about. That wanting something so bad that even if you can't afford it, you're going to keep coming back and you're going to keep looking at it. That's what Jesus is talking about, this look of lust or look of covetousness or evil eye, is to desire that. And in the first century, it was a very serious issue. In fact, they had whole books written because they said that this kind of leering, this lustful look, at another person is a curse. It automatically puts a curse on somebody. And so they had books, a huge number of books talking about ways to break the curse of the evil eye. And so this was a big deal. It was huge in the first century. People used to talk about this all the time. And actually, we have a story from the same century of Jesus. We have a story of a Christian writer who gives us an example of this. Okay, so he says his name was Hermaeus, and he wrote a book. And the book, we have that book nowadays. It's easy to find. It's called The Shepherd of Hermaeus. And in fact, I have a copy of it if you were interested in reading it. It's an interesting book, a little long. So, Shepherd of Hermaeus, the shepherd in the story is his angel. So you've got Hermaeus and his angel. And the whole book is basically discussions between Hermaeus and his angel. And the angel is talking about things in the future, so it kind of feels like Revelation sometimes, but sometimes it's very personal. It starts off with this story where Hermaeus is a slave, okay, and he is serving his mistress, his master, who happens to be a woman, and he is the servant to her. And so he's serving her, he's taking care of her clothes and towel and all that while she is bathing in a river. So she's bathing in a river, he's taking care of her stuff. She comes out of the river and he looks at her. Okay, that kind of look. But he says that what he thought in his head was, I wish I had her for my wife. Which is interesting because that's not the same as I wish I could have sex with her. That's not what he thought. What he thought was, oh, I wish I could have her as my wife. Now, so that's the first chapter. The second chapter, Hermaeus' angel comes over and rakes him over the coals for having this thought and for looking at her that way, for looking at her with the evil eye, for looking at her with lust. And now, it's not the same way that we would think of a look of lust nowadays. Nowadays, we think that a look of lust means somebody looking at somebody and wanting to go to bed with them. Okay, but that's not how it meant in the first century. In the first century, it meant that you wanted to possess them. You wanted to own them. You wanted to take them. So that's the same thing as the covetousness thing. You want to take them. Now, mind you, having sex with somebody is a form of possessing them. So that is covered by that. But the whole thing that Jesus is saying is, it's saying looking at somebody with the intent to possess them, the intent to have them, to the intent of saying that they are now yours. Okay, that's what Jesus is talking about. So it goes beyond just sex. It's not just about sex. It goes beyond that. You know, it's that wow, I wish I had that boyfriend. That kind of thing too. You know, or anyway, we'll get to some other examples, but that's the kind of thing that Jesus is talking about here. So Jesus is saying that adultery covers from the point of actually having sexual intercourse with someone to the leering desire of wanting to possess someone or wanting to have them as yours instead of somebody else's. That covers that whole thing and everything in between. This is the thing, is that what Jesus does a lot of times is he gives you extreme examples, and not just to say, well, this example and this example, these are both examples of lust, or these are both examples of murder or adultery or murder. So Jesus said before with the murder thing, he says, okay, killing people, that's wrong. Everyone knows that's wrong, but verbal abuse. He uses verbal abuse. He says that's murder too. But he also means the stuff in between there is also murder. So if verbal abuse is murder, then punching somebody in the face is along the same lines too. Or doing something violent so that way they might get harmed. Those kinds of things. So all of that falls under the same category. And so Jesus is saying the same thing here. He's saying adultery, cheating on your spouse, having sexual intercourse with somebody who's not your significant other, that's wrong. But, also looking at someone and wanting them to be your your significant other, that's also adultery. It all comes under the same heading of adultery, but all the stuff in between there is too. So what about flirting? Flirting is kind of saying I'd really like you I'd like to possess you or all that. I guess it depends on the intent and all that, but it definitely is heading that way. What about any lesser forms of sexual drawing and all that? Well, that's the same thing. But what about treating someone as if they belong to you? So a woman is walking by on the street, and she's a good-looking woman, and people are going by, and some guys are catcalling or whatever. But you get some guys also who will say, "Smile. You look better if you smile." Well, what are they actually saying? They're saying, what they're really saying is, "You look good. You're my entertainment for the day. So let me tell you what to do." Well, that's a form of possession. It's them telling them, do this. And if they don't do this, then how do they act? They act really angry. Why are they angry? Because they think that person walking by on the street belongs to them. Why? Because she's a woman. You ever been in a conversation with some guy and they're lecturing, like me? Anyway, they're lecturing, and then you disagree with them, and then they get really mad because you're disagreeing with them. Have you ever had that? No? Yeah, it happens to a lot of women. Where you just disagree, and then they go off. They're really mad, and it's because they think you're a woman. You should be agreeable. Okay, that happens to my wife sometimes. These are all things that fall under the same heading. Once again, it'd be weird to call it all adultery, but what it is it's a thing where you're treating someone as if they belong to you. And that is a form of covetousness, and Jesus is specifically talking about covetousness, treating someone else as if they belong to you. All of these things fall under that. So let me tell you, though, that one thing that this passage, this one right here, is really, there are times that where Jesus is saying, well, you shouldn't be thinking this way or you shouldn't be thinking that way. But there is no other place where he equates thinking with sin. Sin means that you've broken a law. Sin means that you've broken a law. Okay? And I'm here to tell you in this passage, Jesus is not talking about thinking as a sin. It's the looking that is the sin, not the thinking. The looking is a small action that reflects what's going on in your head. What's going on in your head, according to what Jesus is saying, is not the sin. It's the action. Even though it's a small action, it's the action that's a sin. Jesus, and in fact, it says in the Bible again and again and again that it never says that we are judged according to what we think. It doesn't say that. It never says that we are judged according to what we believe. It actually doesn't say that. It only says we are judged according to what we do and judged according to what we say. So if we keep it in our heads, it's not yet a sin. Now, mind you, if we think about something enough, it's going to come out. If we think about wanting something enough, then we're going to try and get that thing. You know, my daughter, uh, my daughter really likes, my youngest daughter really likes dressing up like anime characters, cartoon characters. She loves, and this whole thing on the internet and in society now, they call it cosplay, where you are dressing up like one of these characters that you really like. Okay, so my daughter really likes that, and she got her Christmas money one time, and Christmas, my birthday money, got birthday money one time, and got this whole costume and dressed as one of her favorite characters, and she just loves that, and so she wants to do that again. And we're just like, we're not going to pay for this. This is not our thing. We're not going to pay. But she has been looking for like 2 years at different costumes that she can have, and she looked up how much it all cost and all that. And this one costume that she wants to do is like $200 with all that, because there's a wig and there's the dress and there's the not dress but the clothing and all this. And so she says like $200, and I'm like, really? Okay, well, I ain't paying for that. But she really wants that. Okay, in the Old Testament in the Old Testament language, she would be coveting that. She is coveting this thing. She's thinking about it and desiring it, looking it up and all of that. And you can say, well, you don't have any money. You don't have $200, so you're not going to be able to get it. She got a job, so she could get the $200 so she could get her costume. That's the power of wanting something in your head so much that eventually you're going to do what you need to in order to get that, right? And so she's working at Burgerville now, which took a lot of effort because she didn't even have ID. She didn't have, so we had to go through a whole bunch of effort to get her this job. But I'm happy to have her get a job, for whatever reason, And so now she has a job. Now she can get that costume, and she is starting. And so she's planning out, okay, I'm going to get the wig first, and then later on, when I get this paycheck, I'm going to get this part of it, and all of that. But the thing is that she thought about it enough that she's going to do it. She meditated on it and thought about it and planned it, and eventually she was going to do it. And that's the relationship between thinking and sin. So if she were not thinking about something innocent, like dressing up like one of her favorite characters, but she was thinking about something bad, like let's say she was thinking about stealing something. Or no, let's say that she saw something that she wanted and she was going to get that, but she decided she wasn't going to get the money for it. She was going to steal it because it was the only way that she could think of to get it. So she decided to go in and steal it. Now she's sinning, okay, because she did the act of sin. But when she was thinking about it, so let's say it's this wig that she really wants. She sees it in the store, so there were different options that she was thinking of. She really wanted it. She's coveting after it. She wants this thing, and she decided to go the route of getting a job so she could earn the money so she could purchase it. Well, that's not sin. You could argue about whether the coveting thing is a sin, but we're just going to say, just to keep it simple, that's not sin. That's not a problem. But if she wanted it and desired it so much and she figured she could never get a job, and then she went in and stole it, that's sin. Both of the thinking processes are almost the same. She thought about it, she planned, she knew how to get it, and she went through the hard effort of fulfilling her plan, and then she got it. But one is sin and the other is not. And it all depended on what she did. She got a job, got the money, went and bought it. That's not a sin. She decided to break into a place and take the wig and hide it under her thing and make sure that the cameras weren't looking, and she walked out. That's a sin.
Yep.
But But you see, the thinking wasn't the sin. It was the doing. The doing of it. That's the problem. No one is going to arrest you for going into a bank and thinking about robbing the bank. Now, if you wrote a note saying, this is a robbery, give me your money, and you handed it to the teller, and then afterwards, when the police got you, said, "Oh, it was a joke." You know what? The police are not going to think it was funny.
Yeah.
Because you did it. You acted on your thought. You acted on it. Even if it was supposed to, quote, be a joke, you still acted on it. If a man sees a woman walking down the street and he glances up, he loses his speech for a minute, and then he goes on with his day, that's okay. But if he looks up and says something lewd to her, that is adultery. That is breaking God's law. That is sin. Because he did something. He did something. A woman who's already in a relationship sees some guy just just all of a sudden really falls for him, and then she just goes, "Whoa, okay, that's not right. I'm already in a relationship." Walks away. No problem. We have feelings, we have thoughts. It's not that big of a deal. But if she goes over and starts fawning on him or leaning on him or stuff like that, that's sin. Because she's in a committed relationship. She can't be doing that. Okay? And so it's the actual action that makes it a sin. Before the action, it might lead to sin or it might not. It might lead to my daughter stealing the wig from the guy, or it might lead to her getting a job and earning the money so she could buy it. It could go either way when it's in your head. The woman may say, "Oh, I'd like him as my boyfriend," and that may turn into her fawning all over him and leaning on him and stuff like that. That would be a sin. Or she could just shake her head and just go, "Wait, what am I thinking?" and go on her way. And she may even think about it. It may even come up in her head later on in that day. But that doesn't mean that it's a sin. It's not a sin because she didn't do anything about it. Nobody else knows about it. Nobody else needs to know about it. And she may even say, "Ooh," to her significant other, "Whoa, I had this just fleeting thought that went through my head today." And he might laugh at her, if he's not the jealous type. Hopefully he's not the jealous type. If he's the jealous type, I hope she doesn't tell him that. Keep your mouth shut. So when Jesus is talking about it, he is talking about action, not thinking. The look of lust is what he's saying is the sin, not the lust itself, not the desire, but the actual look. Okay. So kind of quickly, I want to talk about the rest of the passage too. So he says, "If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. It is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell." Now, of course, he's talking about the looking, right? So you get some guy and he starts staring at this woman, and Jesus is saying, "Look, if your right eye is causing you to sin, it's better for you to rip that eye out and throw it away." Now, there was a guy, his name, he lived in the third century. His name was Origen, and he took that very seriously. Yeah, you can see where this is going. He was young, and he had a hard time controlling his sexual thoughts. And so he thought that if he just cut off his genitalia, then he wouldn't have those thoughts anymore, because that's what Jesus says. If it says if one of your parts of your body is causing you to sin, then cut it off and throw it away. So he did. Now, he became a really famous writer, and he would be the first person to tell you that does not work. That's not the way to take care of lust. Does not work that way. Okay, he says he still had to deal with lust, and he had a health problem on top of it. Okay, so yeah, so now the thing is that we can say, well, then Jesus was wrong. Jesus is using a symbol here. He's not actually talking about the same thing. In fact, if we look somewhere else about what Jesus said, we can see that Jesus totally is against the idea that our body parts cause us to sin. He says that is not correct. He says that in Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. Let's see here. Yeah, Mark chapter 7, starting at verse 21. Mark 7, starting at verse 21. Jesus says, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these things proceed from within and defile the man." In other words, Jesus is saying, it's not your body parts that cause you to sin. It's your thinking that causes you to sin. It's not your body parts. Don't start blaming your body parts, saying, "Oh my goodness, I stole that thing. Bad hand. Hand, you shouldn't have stolen that thing. That's horrible. What are you thinking about? I'm going to cut you off." No, because it's not the hand that forced you to steal something. It is not your eye that forced you to stare at somebody of the opposite sex. So Jesus is not saying start lopping off body parts every time you do a sin, which is why most Christians don't do that. Nobody beside, there are a few people who took that seriously, and they're the ones who will tell you, wow, that was a mistake. Okay, so what is Jesus talking about? What he's saying is when you have things that cause you to sin, then it is important for you to separate. The word cut it off in this context means to separate from, to break off. Like let's say that there is somebody who's constantly telling you, there's these guys and this one friend is constantly telling them, "Oh, you should sleep with this person or that." You don't need that kind of a relationship. Cut it off. Cut off the relationship. Cut off the situation that's going to do that. If you are a man and you are in a church telling you that you need to force your wife to be submissive, you need to force your wife to do something, you need to take control of your family and make sure that they do what it is that they're supposed to do, that church is an evil church. They are not telling us to be leaders in the way that God tells us to be leaders. And we need to cut off our relationship from from those kinds of people. We have to cut off, and if there are people who are saying, "Oh, this thing isn't so bad. It's okay to do this kind of drug or that kind of drug. There's no problem with that. There's no harm is going to come to you. You're not going to hurt anybody else." You need to cut off from those kinds of people. Just there's no reason for you to be in relationship with those kinds of people. So a lot of times when Jesus is saying cut off, he's saying cut off from relationships. He's not talking about actual body parts. He's talking about cutting off friendships, which may feel like cutting off a piece of your body. You notice how Paul, he talks about people in the body of Christ. And he says at one point, if this one person in the body of Christ may be an eye. This other person in the body of Christ may be a hand. You see, Paul gets it. He said Jesus isn't talking about body parts, he's talking about people. And sometimes we have to cut off people. If we have a person who's telling us, oh, you just need to, that person did you wrong. You just need to, you need to keep being bitter against them. You need to keep hating them. You need to keep, just don't have, and all that. You need to cut it off. You need to cut off your relationship with them because you don't need anybody telling you to hate. We have enough problem with that ourselves. We don't need anybody else helping us. Okay. All right. And so what Jesus is, so the other thing that we need to remember is that Jesus himself says that our sin is usually begins in our heads. It usually begins with our thinking. So we also need to cut off bad thinking. Most men who end up being abusive, they become abusive because they think they deserve something that they don't deserve. And this relates directly to what Jesus is saying here. There's a lot of people who think that or expect to have something that somebody else should give them. There are people who expect that if they see a particular woman or whatever and they desire her, that woman should have sex with them. There are people like that. There are people who, or at least go out on a date. And so they go out and they ask someone for a date, and then that person says no and gets offended because they asked or because they're really creepy or whatever. And then that person gets offended and starts calling that woman all kinds of names because she wouldn't go along with him. He has an expectation that is false. He thinks that he should get something that he doesn't have any right to. And the funny thing is that almost all of us do that sometimes. A lot of us think that we have a right to something that we don't actually have a right to. And those kinds of thinking, those kinds of expectations, we need to cut off. And this is especially if we expect something from somebody else. And sometimes we have a need. It's a real need. Some men actually have a need to be sexually satisfied. Okay, that's a real need, but we don't look to somebody else to necessarily fulfill that. Because that isn't somebody else's absolute responsibility. It just isn't. If a person says no, then it's no, and that should be okay. If we feel, and this is the same thing, it's really hard because we're out on the street or we're really poor and we're really hungry and we ask somebody for something and then they say no, and maybe they're even being a jerk about it, and we're going to be mad at them because they're not giving us what it is that we need. But you know what? It's not their responsibility to give us what we need. It just isn't. We may wish that they could do that they would help, but they don't have to help. Now we can say the Bible says that they're going to be judged about it, but that doesn't help us to get angry at them or have hatred to them because they're not helping us. We just need to go to another person until somebody is willing. You know, I have a friend of mine. She's really sweet gal, her and her husband, and they live in an RV. And it is now legal in Portland that if you have an RV, that if it's parked on a driveway, that you can, if it's parked on a driveway, then they're not going to tow you. The city's not going to tow you. So that's the one thing that you can do with an RV or a van. If you're living in it, you can park it on a driveway and they're not going to tow you. So my friend is really desperately looking for a driveway to put her RV in. And she says, we'll pay for the driveway. We have $100 a month that we can pay for the driveway. You know, we'll help out with chores. We'll be neat and clean. And they will too. You know, they're not those people who say, oh yeah, we'll do this. And then they won't do it. No, they'll really do it. You know, but I can see that sometimes she's very angry at the people who aren't helping her because she's so desperate. You know, and she knows her RV is going to get towed and that's her home. but unless she has a driveway or something to put it on. But there are people who want to help, but some people, their driveway is too short. Some people like me, I don't have a driveway. I don't have any place to park an RV. I have to park out on the street too. And so it's really hard. And I can see that it's easy for her to get angry or to expect that some people really ought to help her. But it's not true. It's hard. It's hard when you're really in desperate need. You feel like somebody else ought to fulfill your need, but it's not their responsibility, you know? And I think that that's something that we kind of have to remember. Those are the kinds of thoughts that we need to cut off. It is not helpful. It is not helpful to expect other people absolutely to give us things because we need it. Just because we need it doesn't mean that they have to give it. You know, that's the way it is, and that could be a driveway to park our RV. That could be some guy feeling like he really needs sex. That could be some. It could be somebody really needing respect. Well, just because you need it doesn't mean that everybody's going to give it to you. And that's one of those thoughts that we really need to think about. All throughout the New Testament, the one thing that comes up again and again and again is that occasionally it talks about breaking off relationships with people, and occasionally it talks about getting away from certain groups of people that are causing us to sin. But more often than not, the Bible talks about that we have to renew our minds, that we have to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, that we have to have, it's our heads that have got to be changed. It's the stuff in our heads that we have to cut off more than anything else. And that means that we have to spend time not meditating about the bad things that we feel like we need or whatever, and start meditating on the good things, the positive things that are in our lives that we can do for other people. And we have to just take the bad things, take our worries, take our desperations, take our real needs, and we take them to God and we give them to Him, because He's the one who said that He would really help us with those things. He's the only one that promised that He would help us with those things. And these other things, and then we need to think about what it is that we can do for other people. And the funny thing is that if we focus on helping other people instead of how unhappy we are or how much we need X and X and X, then a lot of times we're going to find that we become different people that either need less or we get our needs fulfilled. That's usually how it works. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes sometimes we don't get it that way. But okay, and I think that's all I wanted to say. And so, and that was long. I'm sorry. Bye, video people.